Great, thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction. And I mentioned before everyone jumped on the call, if you have any questions while I'm speaking and want to also have more of an open communication style, please feel free to include those questions in the chat, or and we'll have Mary get into all of that. But I will be speaking about my personal experiences and my growth in the awareness of brain injuries, the magnitude that recovery is, and really how to advocate for accessibility and your potential new needs or the needs of your loved ones or colleagues, because I have a little bit of experience in all of the above. So as a little bit of background information of myself was already discussed. I've had 10 diagnosed concussions spanning from the years of age 5 through to 26 that all vary in their levels of severity. And I currently am a senior account executive in the tech industry. And on top of that, I am on one of our ERGs, or employee resource groups, for accessibility. And I currently run weekly wellness calls with my team to promote prioritizing your health and wellness in all settings and get comfortable speaking about your own personal experiences in a professional setting. I have had an extremely long journey getting to this point, even though I am pretty young of age, and I'm really excited to share a small piece of my journey with you all here today. So in my second year of university, I probably had the worst concussion that I have ever had. I was a varsity cheerleader, and in an unfortunate accident, I had been thrown up into a pyramid, which was one of the skills that we do, where I had a couple of guys with girls on their shoulders, and I was supposed to go on top of those girls. And unfortunately, I had been overthrown, and while I was spinning in the air, I realized that I was going to go completely over top of these people, and there was nobody behind the pyramid to catch me. So I ended up falling approximately 15 feet directly onto my neck and head, and the people who were supposed to catch me, as they leaned back, ended up falling on top of me as well. I don't remember much about what happened and the in-between, but my sister so graciously went to the hospital with me, and I luckily did not have any spinal damage and ended up being sent home after just an overnight stay and just had my traditional concussion protocol. Since I was a varsity athlete and we all needed to take baseline testing prior to our year of starting our sport, I was not able to continue with my training until I hit that set baseline and was able to overcome it. But with all of those baseline protocols, I'm not too sure how familiar you all are, but it's not very concrete in what is it's not really an accurate representation of what our baselines truly are, and you're able to kind of fudge the numbers. And being a competitive and young person, we all did that, which I hope now is different, but it was the case back when I was in university. But I was no longer cleared for sport until I could surpass this baseline, and I had received exemptions from my professors to recover without academic pressure. Normally, this would be beneficial, but it was actually a really negative experience for me. My concussion did not heal quickly, and at this point, this was probably my 7th or 8th concussion. I had 2 in my first year of university, and I was really in no state to be a student nor really function at the most basic levels. My main symptoms that I had were difficulty with my vision. It had worsened. I would have a lot of blurring when I would look at screens. Light would affect me. I had noise sensitivity, vertigo, legs in processing my surrounding environment, difficulty connecting my speech with my thoughts. And I think the worst of all was I had really developed a severe post-concussion depression, and I couldn't move without pain. If I had too much stimulation, I felt like very off, and it didn't seem like there was a light at the end of the tunnel for me. And I remember joking around and pretty much almost boasting with my friends about how many different painkillers I had just in order to go to the library or to attempt to go to class or to hang out with them. And, almost to the point where it was prideful that I was taking 6 extra strength Tylenols per day or needed to do something different. And that's very unique that now looking back, obviously, is very worrisome that was the perception we had. But I hope that it'll get better, but I guess that's why we have these discussions and open up this form of communication. But I barely ate. I was drinking around 6 cups of coffee a day in order to get through the day on top of those painkillers. I was extremely unhealthy, and I didn't know the difference or why that was bad. And I was so angry at myself for not being able to recover faster or just get over it or to really have any sort of control over my recovery, that nothing really could pull me out of that dark place. And I was so low and in so much pain that I struggled with suicidal thoughts, self-harm, and just a total loss of self-awareness. I did not see the point in being who I was if I could no longer recognize myself. And it was a very, very dark time. And I saw this uphill battle that just would never ease up. And I wasn't sure what the point of it all was. And I remember it was probably 4 months after my hit, and I called my mom and I started to just sob because I just felt like I had no control over anything and I didn't know what to do. And her first reaction, it's dating a little bit far behind now, so it might not be totally factual, but I'm sure she would love to clarify if she could. But I remember her just saying, well, why didn't you tell us about your struggle sooner, and why couldn't you have us give us the information needed so that we could actually help you? And that's something that I really struggled with, and explaining my symptoms and not allowing the pressure of trying to be this person that I had once knew I was really get in my way, and my healing process and what I thought was normal was completely thrown out the window. So I was terrified of failure, and the thought of letting people in to help me was unbearable. I was in no state really to continue my academic year, cheerlead, socialize, and yet I still did all of that. And I didn't listen to the doctors or my body. If I was going to a club with my friends, I would wear my sunglasses and wear earphones in to block the noise. And I listened to what my coach was requesting me to do, which was hit my baseline and return to practice as soon as possible. So I did that much sooner than I should have. And I didn't hesitate to also begin my schoolwork again. I was overcome with the feeling of, if I do not complete my degree within the 4 years, and if I take this year off to heal, I'll be set back again. And hindsight is always 2020. I really do wish that I had taken the time to heal that year off, just to really seek out the specialist that I need, take the time that I needed, and then re-engage once I was ready. But that wasn't my reality. And luckily enough, I did end up finding my path, but I think it definitely could have taken been a lot of an easier process if I just listened to myself. But so I went back to practice and to school, and I had this fear that I wouldn't be good enough. I stopped listening to what I needed, and I really put myself in a horrible position and permanently damaged my brain in doing so. Even with my accommodations, I had one professor that didn't help me in the slightest. And while I should have taken that leave of absence, I decided to postpone my schoolwork until the end of the, I guess, course, because if I hadn't, it would have shown up on my transcripts as me dropping all of these courses and reflecting at 0, which should not have been the case, but that's how a lot of schools handle these situations. And while a lot of my professors did find a way to make my schoolwork a little bit more accessible for what I needed, one of my professors did not do that, and they ended up putting the weight of my entire course into my one final exam without me having the opportunity to study or to heal, and I ended up failing because of that. Other measures could have been taken in order to help me succeed and not keep me down, but that was the best offered option to me by this person, and I really had no voice to say that it wasn't going to benefit me, and it ended up pushing back a lot of my other coursework because it was a prerequisite for me to graduate and take my more advanced courses in the coming years. So now that I reflect back on that story, and you can always say what I would do differently in order to make the world more accessible for me while I'm going through that. But really, it is so difficult for us to advocate for ourselves, I think. And for me, I was in such a slow and painful recovery that I didn't understand, that I fought against it. I could barely get through my day, let alone sit with someone and explain to them what I thought I needed, because I had no idea. And I really wasn't able to show up for myself in a way that I wanted to, and no one really understood how severe my symptoms were. And I think that's one of the hardest things that I've experienced post-brain injury, which is not being able to express how difficult of a time you're having. And it's completely isolating. As far as we've come with our awareness, there are still stigmas that surround not functioning in a way that society has deemed as normal or regular. And whenever I reintroduced myself back into my activities, school, and the work that I was used to doing or had once done, it was difficult and really lacking of support. I would be, jumping back into my cheerleading, for example, and they would just expect me to be able to do our entire practice with not taking breaks, and that was not feasible, but I didn't say no. So I would end up, bringing all of my painkillers with me, just having a lot of breaks, doing a lot of sitting and trying to keep myself from spiraling, because I was just at this very low point where if they say I'm good to go, I'm good to go, and I need to be okay. And really, there's that whole conception of, well, you look okay, and you're saying you're okay, so be okay. And that is so far from what actually happens, and what the just amount of steps you have to take in order to find your new normal, because I'm no specialist on this, but I don't think that you really ever do return back to what you once were, and that's difficult in a story on its own, in its own little nutshell, but it's okay. And it's okay to reframe what you believe to be productive, how you now work, the boundaries that you set, and the person you now are, because healing the brain takes time, it takes effort, and it is something that you really can't put down into a this shoe fits all model. So I was doing some research prior to this webinar, and a recent study concluded that many individuals with TBI experience stigma and discriminatory behaviors or negative attitudes from those around them. And these behaviors tend to come from a wide variety of variables, including your pre-injury years of education, your occupation, your post-injury affective factors, such as anxiety, depression, and what your rehabilitation is influenced by. Which, in other words, the more accepting, understanding, and inclusive your surrounding environment can be, the higher chances of a good quality of life and reintroduction into your normal and post-TBI recovery journey will actually be. So I can pause here, see if there's any questions while I just take a sip of water, and then I'll continue down my little speech here. So 20 concussions, my goodness, my apologies. 10 concussions in 20 years is no easy feat. And it's not like I'm accepting an award, but it would not have been possible without the help of a childhood friend who, when I was 5 years old, accidentally hit me pretty hard in the head with a baseball bat while they were playing a game of baseball with a few other kids. I cannot tell you what happened, and the subject is really difficult for my parents to be brought up, so I don't really ask too many questions about it still to this day, but I can't imagine how it must have felt watching that take place as a parent and being helpless, unsure of what would happen. I mean, that was 21 years ago when there was so little information on brain injuries. And where do you go? How do you know what's going to happen when there's not that education, awareness, understanding that we now have? I was so young with so much brain development ahead of me that it's difficult to say if I would have been the same person I am today, or if I would have had different, just differences in general. I've always struggled with that unknown. Like, if I had not been hit in the head at such a young age, would I have had the same struggles in the classroom with my focus, with my stuttering, with just processing information, how I conduct myself with people? What would have been? That's always been something that I've thought about, but because I can't control it, I've celebrated who I am today and what I've been able to overcome. However, with each concussion that I've had, all of my symptoms and all of the daily struggles that I've had to face seemed to get worse, and there are still days that I can barely function. I was always a very hyperactive kid, and by the age of 25, I had accumulated 9 diagnosed concussions, 4 of which happened in the span of 4 years while I was in university, mostly due to sport. Once was just an accident, but because I had been hit so many times, I'm very susceptible to concussions, whether they be minor or major, and just a little tap on the head or something can really set me back. And I didn't really begin to understand the gravity of that. And the potential for a more difficult life until after that concussion that happened in second year. And that's where I really began to attempt to heal what I could, learn more about what was happening, and how I could make the most out of a not so ideal situation and help others. I found it very interesting, and interesting is putting things quite lightly, how difficult it is to know what kind of treatment you require in order to best heal the injury that you have. From my own personal experience and in speaking with others, there's absolutely no linear progression or path to recovery that everyone can follow and then wind up healed. With brain injuries, you're often stuck. You jump from specialist to specialist with little to no coverage to aid in this journey. And it took over a year upon referrals for any specialist to see me for around more than 15 minutes, prescribe some sort of drug, and then never speak with me again. And it was on me to reach out and ask for assistance. And I was really in no state to be that one reaching out, but that's how it works. And I'll refer back to that study that I mentioned earlier, where the more inclusive an environment, the higher chances of success and reintegration a brain injury survivor will have. Yet, even within the field of neurology, this is difficult to make a priority because it's difficult to keep up with all of the people that you see on a daily basis. They are not your set designated patients. They're just referred to you. You help them. You're never going to see them again. Or if you do, it's because they've created that action. And I have been, and I kid you not, I've been to every doctor specialist under the sun. And I didn't really begin to see any sort of transformational differences until this past year, when I really began to understand what my limits were and how I best move forward. I had just experienced my 10th concussion, and it fortunately wasn't too severe. But I realized something needed to change. I had already been to see so many specialists, and while it was extremely helpful for my concussions very close post to receiving them, it wasn't something that was sustainable over my long-term recovery. And I was still symptomatic every single day. On my best days, I would be borderline migraine with dizzy spells, mood swings, anxiety, obsessive thoughts that everyone around me could see how much I struggled just to participate in my regular activities. So I began to research into gastrointestinal issues, their connection with the brain, and I questioned what I could control and what I couldn't. I just let go of. I started to take different supplements. I changed my diet to be more brain healthy, and I forced myself to eat fish. And it started to improve my baseline. And all of this in combination with what my specialists were recommending, my reduction in screen time, which is very tough to do with the job that I have, started to lead into just a more sustainable long-term healing process. And all of this just has led into now where I am today. I have so much to continue to learn, but I know how stressful it can be to witness loved ones, colleagues, or yourself go through a brain injury. And I think that if there's one thing I've learned, it's how to advocate for yourself and adapt your environment to better suit your new needs, whether it be while in recovery, with long-term symptoms, or any challenges that may be faced post. Which that leads me into the age-old question of how do I set healthy boundaries? This is something that is so difficult in all facets of life. And even in preparing for this webinar, I was overworking myself with how much I had on my plate. I'm at the end of my month for work with having to pull in whatever I can with my accounts. And I was working 12, 14 hours a day in trying to manage everything that I wanted to do. So it turned into my vision blurring every half an hour or so. I had a difficulty concentrating. I could notice that when I was running meetings with my clients, I was lagging and not really able to process again what they were speaking to me about. And I placed so much pressure on myself to provide an insightful and educational webinar and quality of work so that this would not be of detriment to the cycle that I had found myself in, that I actually ended up hurting myself more than doing myself a solid. So I made myself sit back and be realistic with my workflow that would suit my needs better. The amount of hours that I put in and the breaks that I put in changed significantly, and I was able to return back to what I prefer to work at. And the pressure that so many of us face is so interesting, because once we realize that most of it's internal, you can actually let it go. I'm sure if I had not changed the way that I was preparing even for this webinar, I would not have been able to give as quality of a presentation as I can now, because I've given myself more breaks, more understanding and sympathy. And that was all my internal monologue. In my workplace, we are very numbers oriented. Like many people in sales, it's your numbers, your quota that really counts at the end of the day. And yes, there are unforeseen circumstances that we consider, but it's part of the job. There are massive highs and major lows, and the pressure to achieve these end numbers can often be paralyzing and detrimental to our success, which I do have a point coming out of this. Please bear with me. In sales, the end goal will always be to go back to that normal or that baseline that you feel most like yourself, similar to post-brain injury. This can often be something that seems so unachievable, so daunting, that placing such a pressure on yourself to get better actually hinders in your recovery. And you have to realize that it won't be perfect, and some months will be better than others. And as long as you listen to your mind and body, there will be growth and positive results. The second point that I wanted to make from this is that depending on your path, any reintroduction into society will look different. There will be pressures felt in all aspects of your life. For myself, I would, and still often, dissociate in large gatherings. There's often so much noise, movement, any form of stimulation that I tend to shut down, get a little cranky, and need to recharge in my own dark corner when I can. When I was younger, I felt this pressure to wear my mask and to keep up with it all. But I would often make myself sick and needing these recovery days. And they would span maybe, upwards 24 to a few days to recover from just putting myself in those situations and not listening to my needs. And now I listen to myself. Sometimes I can handle it. I thrive with it, and I am incredible at keeping up. I'm very personable, and people won't notice that I'm lagging. But if I'm not feeling well, I know to keep to myself or to just stay home. And learning that takes time. When I first joined the corporate world, I joined as a business development manager. My main focus was growing the business of the company that I was a part of. I would send emails, I would make calls, run demonstrations, and manage sales cycles. This was exhausting. I was at my desk by 8 a.m. sharp and would barely give myself a break until 6 or 7 p.m. at night. And I didn't have the results to show the amount of work that I was putting into that. I would have horrible bouts of vertigo, severe migraines, and no energy. I was exhausted 24/7 without doing anything. And I wasn't producing the results that I wanted to see, and I felt like I was failing. I also wasn't comfortable speaking to the difficulties I was facing each and every day. And I figured that I could just work through it and I would be fine. And it didn't end well, and I ended up burning out. And I would have such a bad headache that I would have to go into those dark realms. And this, unfortunately, was a very dark experience and would happen so frequently. But I knew I needed to reprioritize my health, and I wasn't sure how to do so in the setting that I was in because I had been placing myself in that style of work for so long. So when I was hired into my current role as a senior account executive, I knew I didn't want to stay in this cycle. And after learning to set boundaries in my personal life and getting back to a place where I was comfortable with, I was nervous that I would fall right back into attempting to maintain a workplace life cycle that didn't work for me because it was just status quo. This led into me being my own advocate. I knew I was more than capable of the role, its responsibilities, and achieving my numbers, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. I didn't want to come across as a negative drag on my manager and my senior leaders, and I realized that in order to find this flow that worked best for me, I had to be strong on my work ethic when I could and produce my results with my own new way of work. And the biggest thing about being your own advocate is finding advocates for you, and I like to call them my champions. The people who have your back and can back you up when you falter, which is very intimidating to let people in on this. But the main advice I can offer is to not suffer in silence. We all have our own struggles and needs, and in letting the people in my workplace into what I was going through, I ended up being extremely surprised with just how many people barely batted an eye with the accommodations I was requesting. My current manager still continues to this day asking me how he can help me, what he can do to be more accommodating in a way that suits me best, which is how things should be. That way of work for me changes on a daily basis. There are some days where I am so productive, I can get through all of my tasks without fault in the first few hours. But then there are other days, if I have the similar task load, that it takes me all day because I need more breaks. I'm just not at the same baseline. And I build my schedule in anticipation for these, when I need these extra breaks or support. And I write everything down and make accountability checklists so that I don't forget if I've been asked to do something or if one of my accounts needs something. I have slip ups, but so does everybody. And my lists help me stay on track and make sure that I'm as productive as possible and not producing no results while working extensive hours. And that's my manager, my champion, who helps me to make sure I'm not overworking myself. He realizes that I'll often put myself in the position where I have too much on the go, and he'll check in on me, see if I need to take an afternoon off or a mental health day. And it's okay if I do, which has been a game changer that all companies should adopt. I don't work my best when I'm required to work 5 days a week from 9 to 5, but that's okay. I think no one really works their best on that schedule, and that's quite standard across the corporate world. But as long as we can get our work done and are hitting our targets and doing well, we should be able to have these open conversations about the flow of work that suits us best. And as someone who isn't afraid of speaking my needs now, I've seen my career take off and blossom into something that I'm proud to work towards. I have a company now that I work with that one of their employee resource groups that I'm on the board of is specifically for people with disabilities in order to receive the help that they need, how they need it, no questions asked. And we will find a way to adopt your style of work in, which I am extremely proud of. And some days are hard, especially when not everybody knows that I face different struggles. The person next to me could be undergoing something very similar, but everyone has these struggles that, we just have to create more of an open and understanding environment. Having those difficult conversations, taking a moment to ask, can you repeat that? Or I'm not understanding, is there a different way that we can approach this? Or explain really goes a long way. And when I work with my clients, I try to consider their needs as well, making whatever I present or need to discuss as accessible as possible. So this is pretty much the point that I had to this webinar today, and I really hope that the information that I provided has resonated and is applicable to each of your lives. If you've had a brain injury and struggle with holding these tough conversations, finding the right therapy, or are on the path to recovery, it can be extremely difficult to fit back into your old life. You really shouldn't be forced or pressure yourself to put yourself into that box. With TBI awareness still only just coming into the picture, there's still a lot we have to do to aid those around us in understanding that we're different now and it's okay. And I hope my stories help to provide comfort that it's okay where you are now and who you are now. You will find your way. If you have a loved one that is struggling, helping just make the space as accommodating and accessible as possible will go a long way. As I mentioned before, my mom had no idea what I needed because I was not around her 24/7 and giving her only what I was giving. And I'm sure that if I had been a little bit more open, she would have been there, and same with my friends around me. So if you don't push things on the people that are in your lives that are having brain injuries, or make them feel any type of pressure to progress or to not, give them space and the help they need to seek out the recovery that suits them best. And, maybe aid in that. The best forms of therapy and the best specialists that I have seen are because people in my life have recommended them to me, and I've said, why not? I'll try it. And it has given me a very, very put me in a very good place. If you have a colleague or an employee who is struggling, be the one to set up a reintroduction into their new way of work that is different from how it used to be. Ask them how they believe that they work best now, and be open to changing based off of their circumstances and needs. We're all humans, we all struggle, and invisible brain trauma is already difficult enough to deal with, let alone having to explain why you're now the way you are, because how do you even understand that yourself? It can be isolating, hurtful, and negative without the correct support. In wrapping up, my door is always open to speak to this more. I really appreciate the support and attendance from everyone today. And if anyone has any questions about my story or brain injuries, please do feel free to ask them now.